I flew across the country to see my son's new house, but he whispered, "Don't tell the neighbors. My name is Bertha Johnson, 67 years old, and I always thought I knew everything about my only son, Trevor. After my husband died 3 years ago, Trevor became my whole world, despite living across the country in Boston. When he invited me to see his new house, I was overjoyed. But the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. Standing at his front door, Trevor looked over his shoulder and whispered words that chilled me. "Don't tell the neighbors who you really are, Mom." I noticed curtains moving in the window next door. What was my son hiding? If you're watching this from a place where family secrets are normal, hit like and subscribe as I reveal what my son was hiding from the entire neighborhood. After 35 years teaching elementary school in Phoenix, Arizona, retirement felt both welcome and strange. The rhythm of my life changed completely 3 years ago when my husband Frank passed away from a sudden heart attack. Our modest ranch-style home felt too quiet, too empty without him. Our son Trevor had moved to Boston nearly 10 years earlier for a job in the tech industry, and while we spoke weekly on video calls, I only saw him in person during his brief holiday visits. Trevor was always the ambitious one. Frank and I had raised him to work hard and chase his dreams, even if those dreams took him 3,000 miles away from us. When he called to tell me about his promotion to senior project manager, I could hear the excitement bubbling in his voice. 2 months later, he shared the news that he had purchased his first house in an exclusive suburban development outside Boston. "It's in Oakwood Heights, Mom," he had explained. "The most prestigious neighborhood in the area. The connections I can make here will be invaluable for my career." I remember feeling so proud, yet a little sad knowing this move meant he was putting down permanent roots so far from Arizona. Still, when he invited me to visit and see his new home, I immediately said yes. "You should come for 2 weeks, Trevor insisted. "The guest room is all ready for you." I noticed a slight hesitation in his voice when I asked about the neighborhood. "It's very particular," he said carefully. "Very exclusive. The homeowners association is quite strict about maintaining certain standards." At the time, I dismissed his strange tone. Looking back, I should have paid more attention. The trip preparations gave me purpose. This would be my first major travel since Frank died. I spent hours choosing the right clothes, planning little gifts to bring, and even got a new haircut. My neighbor Judy drove me to the Phoenix airport, where I nervously navigated security and boarding for the first time in years. When I finally emerged into the Boston terminal, exhausted from the long flight, I spotted Trevor immediately. But something seemed off. My usually confident son was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting around the baggage claim area. When he hugged me, it felt stiff, performative. "You look wonderful, Mom," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. In the car, Trevor began listing strange rules about the neighborhood. "The HOA is really particular," he explained, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "If anyone asks, just say you're visiting for a short time. Don't mention Arizona much. Keep conversations brief. They value privacy." "That seems odd," I replied. "Why would my home state matter?" Trevor laughed, but it sounded forced. "It's just how things are in Oakwood Heights. You'll understand when you see it." As we drove through the neighborhood entrance with its ornate stone pillars and perfectly manicured landscaping, I was impressed by the beauty but unsettled by the uniformity. Every lawn was identical, every house a slight variation on the same grand colonial style. Trevor's house was stunning 2-story brick colonial with black shutters and a red door. Inside, the furniture looked expensive but somehow impersonal, like a model home waiting for real owners to move in. No personal photographs adorned the walls, no trinkets or mementos sat on shelves. The house looked beautiful but unlived in. As I wheeled my suitcase into the guest room, Trevor stopped me at the doorway, looking nervously out the front window where a curtain twitched in the house across the street. "Mom," he whispered, leaning close, "don't tell the neighbors who you really are." I barely slept that first night in Trevor's beautiful but sterile guest room. His warning about the neighbors played over and over in my mind. What could he possibly mean? Who did he think I was, if not his mother from Arizona? In the morning light, I noticed more oddities about the house. The bookshelf in the living room contained volumes that seemed untouched, arranged by color rather than subject. The kitchen was spotless, with high-end appliances that showed no signs of use. Most troubling was the complete absence of family photos. No pictures of me and Frank, no graduation photos of Trevor, nothing that showed our family history. When Trevor came downstairs in an impeccably pressed suit, he seemed surprised to find me already awake sitting at the kitchen island with coffee. "I thought I should go over a few house rules," he said, pouring himself coffee in a hurried manner. "If the doorbell rings while I'm at work, please don't answer it. The HOA sometimes does surprise inspections." "Inspections of what?" I asked. "Compliance issues, property maintenance standards, that sort of thing." His voice was tight. "And if you go for a walk, which you're welcome to do, keep conversations with neighbors brief. If they ask personal questions, be vague. The community values discretion." "Trevor, honey, you're starting to worry me. What is going on here?" He forced a smile. "Nothing, Mom. Oakwood Heights is just very exclusive. People move here for privacy and a certain lifestyle. I worked too hard to get this house to risk any complications." After Trevor left for work, I decided to explore the neighborhood. The June morning was pleasant, with perfectly trimmed trees providing dappled shade along the wide sidewalks. Every house looked immaculate with professional landscaping and luxury vehicles and driveways. I noticed small security cameras discreetly positioned on many properties, including Trevor's. "Good morning," called a woman's voice. I turned to see a slim woman in her 40s approaching, her blonde hair cut in a precise bob. She wore tennis clothes and a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Trevor's mother. I'm Linda Peterson from across the street. We've all been so curious about his family." "Yes, I'm Bertha," I replied, remembering Trevor's warning to be careful. "Just visiting for a short while." "From where exactly?" she pressed, still smiling. Trevor has been somewhat private about his background. "Oh, from out west," I said vaguely. "Trevor has done so well for himself here." "Indeed. The neighborhood selection committee was quite impressed with his application. We're very particular about maintaining the special character of Oakwood Heights." "Selection committee?" I asked, surprised. "For buying a house?" Linda's smile tightened. "Of course. Not just anyone can join our community. We have standards to uphold, traditions to maintain." Before I could respond, Trevor appeared jogging up in business attire despite the warm morning. "Mom, I forgot some files and came back to get them. I see you've met Linda." "We were just getting acquainted," Linda said, her eyes evaluating the interaction between Trevor and me. "Perhaps you both can join us for the neighborhood dinner tonight at Margaret's. She's our HOA president and would love to meet Trevor's mother." "We'd be delighted," Trevor answered quickly. 6 o'clock. "Perfect. Margaret's house is the large colonial at the end of the cul-de-sac. Everyone dresses for dinner," she added with a pointed look at my casual outfit. As Linda walked away, I turned to Trevor. "What was that about selection committee's special character of the neighborhood, Trevor? What's going on?" "It's nothing, Mom," he insisted, guiding me back toward his house. "Oakwood Heights is just exclusive. Property values depend on maintaining certain standards." Back inside, I discovered a community newsletter Trevor had hidden under some mail. The front page detailed rigid regulations about everything from approved plants to permitted holiday decorations. One section, titled Community Standards Enforcement, described a 3-strike policy for violations, with the 3rd strike resulting in community action. When I asked Trevor about it, he became defensive. "It's just how things work here, Mom. Oakwood Heights is the most prestigious address in the area. My boss lives 3 streets over. The connections I'm making are crucial for my career." As evening approached, Trevor became increasingly anxious about the neighborhood dinner. He laid out specific topics I should avoid, details about our family background, my teaching career in Phoenix, and, surprisingly, any mention of Frank's parents who had immigrated from Mexico in the 1940s. "But why?" I asked, confused by his instruction to hide his own heritage. "It's complicated, Mom. This isn't Arizona. Things work differently here." Trevor checked his watch nervously. "Just follow my lead tonight, please. This neighborhood dinner is important." As we prepared to leave, I glanced out the window to see neighbors gathering, all dressed in formal attire, moving toward the large house at the end of the street like actors assembling for a performance. Margaret Adams' home was even larger and more imposing than Trevor's, with soaring columns flanking the entrance and museum-quality artwork on every wall. A uniformed server took our coats, while Margaret herself, a tall, silver-haired woman with a patrician bearing, greeted us with practiced warmth. "Trevor, how wonderful! And this must be your mother." She extended a manicured hand. "We're so pleased you could join us. Everyone has been eager to meet a member of Trevor's family." The dining room contained about 20 neighbors seated around an enormous mahogany table. Trevor quickly guided me to our places, whispering names as we passed William and Patricia Davis, the retired investment banker and his wife, Robert Taylor, the hospital administrator, Susan Wilson, the real estate developer. Everyone was white affluent and watching us with curious eyes. "So, Mrs. Johnson," William began once we were seated. "Trevor tells us you're visiting from the West. Colorado, was it?" Before I could correct him, Trevor interjected. "Northern California, actually. Mom lived in Boulder briefly, though." I gave my son a confused look, which he avoided by suddenly becoming very interested in his water glass. "And what did your late husband do?" Patricia asked, passing a platter of roasted vegetables. "He was an engineer," Trevor answered for me again. "Worked for several major firms." This was partially true. Frank had been a civil engineer, but he'd worked for the city of Phoenix his entire career, not for major firms. "Trevor mentioned you were a teacher," Margaret commented. "Private school, correct?" I opened my mouth to explain my 35 years in public education when Trevor cut in again. "Mom taught at an exclusive academy," he said quickly. "Very selective admissions." The conversation continued this way throughout dinner, with neighbors asking probing questions about our background, Trevor answering with half-truths or outright fabrications, and me growing increasingly uncomfortable with each exchange. "The previous owner of your home wasn't a good fit for our community," Robert remarked casually to Trevor. "We're so pleased you've integrated more successfully." "What happened to them?" I asked. A momentary silence fell over the table. "They simply didn't understand our community values," Margaret replied smoothly. "Oakwood Heights has maintained certain standards since its founding in 1952. Not everyone appreciates the importance of cultural continuity. Throughout the evening, I noticed security cameras positioned discreetly in corners of rooms, and neighbors occasionally took photos that seemed aimed at capturing Trevor and me together. During dessert, I excused myself to find the restroom. In the hallway, I overheard Margaret speaking to Trevor in low, urgent tones. "The verification process is nearly complete, but the committee has some outstanding questions about your family documentation. We'll need to schedule a formal interview." "I've provided everything required," Trevor responded, his voice strained. "There are inconsistencies that need resolution. The community has procedures, Trevor. No exceptions." When they noticed me approaching, they immediately separated, Margaret smiling as though nothing had happened. As I passed a closed door, I noticed a biometric lock and a small sign reading, "Records Office, authorized personnel only." Later, as Trevor and I walked home through the perfect streets of Oakwood Heights, I tried again to understand what was happening. "Trevor, you lied about everything tonight, where I live, what I did for a living, even your father's career. Why?" "You don't understand what's at stake, Mom," he hissed, checking to ensure no neighbors were within earshot. "Please, just trust me. It's only for 2 weeks." As we approached his house, I noticed a dark car driving slowly past the driver, watching us intently before continuing on. In the guest room that night, I made a decision. If Trevor wouldn't explain what was happening, I would find out for myself. The next morning, I waited until Trevor left for work before beginning my investigation. In the kitchen, I noticed something odd about the mail stacked on the counter. The name on the envelopes read, "Trevor Hamilton," instead of Trevor Johnson. My son had apparently changed his last name. In his home office, a room he had casually mentioned was still being organized. I found more troubling clues. In a locked drawer, which opened easily with a letter opener, I discovered a file labeled Oakwood Heights Application. Inside was an extensive background check property purchase agreement and, most disturbingly, a family history document that bore little resemblance to reality. According to these papers, Trevor came from a long line of New England professionals. His fictional grandparents were a Boston surgeon and a Connecticut heiress. Our actual family history, including Frank's Mexican heritage and my own mixed European background, had been completely erased. In another drawer, I found family photographs that had been digitally altered. In one, my own features had been subtly changed to appear more European. In another, Frank had been removed entirely and replaced with a different man standing beside me. The meticulous nature of these forgeries was chilling. Using Trevor's laptop, I searched for information about Oakwood Heights. Behind the glossy real estate listings and community accolades, I found troubling references to lawsuits alleging discriminatory housing practices, all settled quietly out of court. A housing rights organization had flagged the community for suspicious application rejections, but nothing had been proven conclusively. I called my old friend Diane, who had worked in real estate for decades. Diane, have you ever heard of communities with selection committees for homebuyers? Oh, Bertha, she sighed. Those still exist, though they're not legal in the way they once were. In the past, neighborhoods had explicit racial covenants preventing certain groups from buying homes. Those were outlawed, but some exclusive communities found workarounds. They use character committees and community standards as thin veils for the same practices. But how can they get away with that? I asked, horrified. They're careful. They create impossible paper trails, claim rejections are based on credit scores or community fit. It's discrimination dressed up in bureaucratic language, and it's notoriously hard to prove. After hanging up, I found more documents Trevor had hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer. Among them were threatening letters from the HOA about the ongoing verification process and the consequences of providing false information. When Trevor returned that evening, I confronted him with my discoveries. You changed your name. You erased our entire family history. You've been living a complete lie. Why, Trevor? Why would you do this? His facade finally crumbled. Slumping onto the sofa, he covered his face with his hands. I tried for 2 years to buy a house in a good neighborhood near work, he explained, voice breaking. Every application in Oakwood Heights was rejected for vague reasons. Then a colleague hinted that the neighborhood had heritage preferences. He suggested I might have better luck if I adjusted some details on my application. So you created an entirely fictional background. I didn't think it would go this far, Trevor admitted. I thought they'd just check my financials, not launch an investigation into my family tree, but once I started, I couldn't stop. This house, this address, it's opened doors for me at work. My boss invited me to join his country club after I moved here. But they're investigating you now, I said gently. Those neighbors, they suspect something. The verification committee has been asking for more documentation. Margaret warned me last week that my position here was under review. When you called about visiting, I panicked. I thought maybe if they met you, if you could just play along temporarily. The doorbell rang, cutting him off mid-sentence. Through the window, I could see Margaret Adams standing on the porch, flanked by William Davis and Robert Taylor, all holding folders. The verification committee, Trevor whispered, his face pale. They're early. Trevor's hands shook as he opened the door. Margaret and her committee members entered without waiting for an invitation, their formal demeanor suggesting this was not a social call. Good evening, Trevor, Margaret said coolly. We've come for the verification interview. I see your mother is present, which is actually quite convenient. They arranged themselves in Trevor's living room like judges preparing for a trial. Margaret placed a folder on the coffee table between them. As you know, Oakwood Heights has a rigorous verification process to ensure all residents meet our community standards, she began. Some discrepancies have arisen regarding your application materials. William opened his folder. According to your application, you come from a long-established New England family. Your grandparents were Dr. James Hamilton of Boston, Massachusetts General, and Catherine Winthrop Hamilton of Greenwich, Connecticut. That's correct, Trevor said, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. Yet, we can find no record of a Dr. James Hamilton at Massachusetts General during the period you specified, Robert interjected. Curious, isn't it? There must be some mistake in the records, Trevor offered weakly. Margaret's smile was predatory. Perhaps, but there are other inconsistencies. You claimed your mother attended Radcliffe College, yet no Bertha Hamilton appears in their alumni records. I watched my son struggling to maintain the elaborate fiction he had created, his professional demeanor crumbling under their calculated assault. More troubling, Margaret continued, are these social media images our committee discovered. She slid several printouts across the table. They were screenshots from my Facebook page showing family gatherings in Phoenix, clearly displaying our diverse family members, including Frank's Mexican relatives. Perhaps you could explain. William said, his tone falsely pleasant, why your mother appears to have an entirely different life in Arizona than the one you described, or why your father bears no resemblance to the man you claimed was your father. Trevor stared at the photos, all color drained from his face. The verification committee has concluded, Margaret announced with clinical detachment, that you provided falsified information on your application to circumvent our community standards. Community standards. I repeated, anger beginning to replace my shock. You mean your preferences for who can live here based on their background? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Oakwood Heights maintains a commitment to cultural continuity and shared values. Trevor understood our requirements when he applied. And what exactly are those requirements? I pressed. Because they sound remarkably similar to the discriminatory housing practices that were outlawed decades ago. We operate entirely within the law, Robert stated flatly. Our selection process evaluates candidates on multiple criteria. Here are your options, Margaret said, turning back to Trevor. You may quietly list your home for sale and leave the community within 30 days with your reputation intact, or we will formally document these findings, which would constitute fraud on your mortgage application. The implied threat hung in the air. My son, who had worked so hard his entire life, looked utterly defeated. The committee will reconvene in 1 week to hear your decision, Margaret concluded, standing to leave. I trust you'll make the sensible choice. After they left, Trevor broke down completely. I've ruined everything, he sobbed. My house, my career, everything I worked for, and I've humiliated you in the process. As I held my son, I felt a familiar protective instinct rising within me, the same fierce determination that had carried me through decades of teaching, through raising him alone when Frank worked nights, through the grief of losing my husband. This discriminatory neighborhood association had picked the wrong mother to intimidate. We're not giving up that easily, I told him, already reaching for my phone. It's time I made a call to an old friend. My former colleague, Sophia Washington, had become a civil rights attorney after leaving teaching, and when I explained Trevor's situation, her response was immediate. This is textbook housing discrimination, Bertha. They're just clever about disguising it behind committees and verification processes. These practices are absolutely illegal under the Fair Housing Act. For the next few days, Trevor and I developed our strategy. Initially reluctant, afraid of further professional repercussions, Trevor gradually found his courage as we worked together. I can't believe I tried to erase who I really am, he confessed one evening. Dad would have been so disappointed in me. Your father would have understood the pressure you were under, I assured him, but he also taught you to stand up for what's right. Remember, I shared stories about the discrimination Frank and I had faced early in our marriage in the 1970s, how we had persevered and the pride we always took in our heritage, despite others' prejudices. With each conversation, I could see Trevor reconnecting with the values we had raised him with. Sophia advised us to gather evidence, so we began recording all interactions with the HOA committee. We set up a meeting with Margaret Adams, ostensibly to discuss Trevor's decision about selling his house. During this meeting, which we recorded with a device hidden in my purse, Margaret made several explicitly discriminatory statements about maintaining the neighborhood's traditional character and ensuring residents share a common background. Meanwhile, Sophia helped us contact other prospective buyers who had been rejected by Oakwood Heights. We found a pattern of minorities and immigrants being denied housing despite strong financial qualifications. One family had actually been approved until the committee saw them in person at the final verification meeting, after which their application was suddenly rejected for incomplete paperwork. Trevor reached out to a trusted colleague at work who connected us with a local journalist interested in housing discrimination issues. The reporter began quietly investigating the neighborhood's history and practices. As our evidence mounted, we noticed increasing surveillance of Trevor's house. Cars drove by slowly. Neighbors suddenly appeared whenever we stepped outside, and Margaret made casual visits to check on our moving plans. Anonymous notes began appearing in Trevor's mailbox. Some people don't belong in Oakwood Heights. Communities have the right to choose their members. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, but the intimidation only strengthened our resolve. Trevor, reconnecting with his true identity and values, began displaying family photos in his home, including pictures of his father and our extended family. When neighbors commented on these new photos, he simply smiled and said he was embracing his full heritage. The night before the committee's deadline, we hosted a strategy meeting at Trevor's house with Sophia, the journalist, and representatives from a fair housing advocacy group. We finalized our approach for confronting the HOA board with our evidence and legal position. As the meeting concluded, Trevor and I stood on his front porch watching the sunset over the perfect neighborhood that had caused so much pain. "I'm ready to be myself again," he said, standing taller than he had since my arrival. "No matter what happens tomorrow." The next morning, we walked together through the neighborhood, heads held high, no longer hiding who we were or where we came from. The HOA boardroom fell silent as Trevor and I entered, followed by Sophia in her professional attire, the journalist, and two representatives from the Fair Housing Center. Margaret's composed expression faltered momentarily before she regained her practiced smile. "This was meant to be a private meeting with the verification committee," she said coolly. "I thought it best to bring my legal counsel," Trevor replied, his voice steady. "And these others are here to observe and document our discussion." The committee members exchanged worried glances as we all took seats around the conference table. "We have reviewed all evidence related to the allegations against my client," Sophia began formally, "and we've compiled extensive documentation of what appears to be systematic housing discrimination in Oakwood Heights." "That's a serious and unfounded accusation," William Davis interrupted. "Our selection process is based on financial qualifications and community fit." "We have recordings," I stated calmly, placing a small device on the table, "of Margaret explicitly stating that certain ethnic backgrounds don't belong in this neighborhood." Margaret's face paled. "That's taken out of context and possibly illegal." "We also have testimony from 12 families who were rejected despite strong financial qualifications," Trevor added. "All minorities or immigrants, all rejected after their verification meetings." The journalist took notes while the housing advocates distributed folders containing our evidence to each committee member. "Additionally," Sophia continued, "we've uncovered documents showing that while Oakwood Heights publicly disavowed its original racial covenants from the 1950s, the neighborhood has continued to enforce them through this verification process and committee structure." For the first time since I'd met her, Margaret Adams appeared genuinely rattled. "What exactly do you want?" "First," Trevor said, standing up straight, "I'm Trevor Johnson, son of Frank Johnson, who came from a Mexican-American family, and Bertha Johnson, who taught in public schools for 35 years. That's who I am, and I have every legal right to live in this neighborhood without hiding my identity or heritage." The silence that followed was profound. "Second," Sophia added, "we're prepared to file a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and a federal lawsuit alleging systematic violations of the Fair Housing Act unless significant changes are implemented immediately. And third," the journalist interjected, "I'll be publishing an investigative piece on housing discrimination in exclusive communities with Oakwood Heights as my primary case study." The committee members looked to Margaret, their leader, suddenly, without a clear path forward. After a tense discussion among the board members, they agreed to our demands. Trevor would remain in his home with no further verification requirements. The HOA would disband its selection committee, and the neighborhood would implement fair housing training for all board members. In the weeks that followed, the story broke in local media, creating a divided response in the community. Some neighbors avoided us entirely, while others surprised us with their support. Several admitted they had felt uncomfortable with the verification process, but had been afraid to speak up. The HOA leadership resigned, replaced by a more diverse board, including 2 younger couples who had previously been rejected but reapplied after our case became public. Slowly, Oakwood Heights began a transformation toward the inclusive community it should have been all along. I extended my visit to help Trevor through the transition. Each day he seemed to stand taller, speak more confidently, and take pride in displaying his true identity. Several of his colleagues, learning the full story, expressed admiration for his courage in challenging the system. "You know," Trevor said one evening as we sat on his porch, now decorated with plants reminiscent of our Arizona home, "in trying so hard to advance my career and social standing, I almost lost myself completely." "Sometimes we need to be reminded of who we really are," I replied. "Your father would be so proud of you now, not for the house or the job, but for finding the courage to stand up for what's right." Before returning to Arizona, I helped Trevor host a neighborhood gathering for those who had supported us and the new families moving into the community. It was nothing like the formal, stilted dinner at Margaret's house. This was authentic, joyful, and celebrated the diverse backgrounds of everyone present. My experience in Oakwood Heights changed me too. Back in Phoenix, I started a support group for families facing housing discrimination, sharing the lessons we had learned. The quiet retirement I had settled into after Frank's death gave way to a new chapter of advocacy and purpose. Through standing up for my son, I rediscovered my own strength. Sometimes the most powerful thing a mother can do is simply refuse to let the world tell her child he isn't good enough exactly as he is. Have you ever had to choose between fitting in and staying true to yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons. Your support means everything to me. Remember that your authentic self is always enough, and sometimes standing up against injustice changes not just your own life, but the lives of many others. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to always embrace your true identity.